An executive zombied a new band. John Lennon Did That, and the record label stopped. London, 1967. The offices of EMI Records on Manchester Square, usually a bastion of polished professionalism, felt particularly cold and sterile that day. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and stale ambition, seemed to stifle any hint of creativity. John Lennon sat in a plush yet uncomfortable armchair, Yoko Ono by his side. They weren't there for a Beatles meeting. They were there for a new band, a young experimental group called The Echoes, whom John had personally championed. The Echoes were raw, unconventional, pushing the boundaries of sound. They were everything John believed music should be: fearless, authentic, and utterly uncompromised. He saw in them a reflection of his own rebellious spirit, a nascent spark of genius that deserved to be nurtured, not crushed. But the music industry, even in the psychedelic haze of 1967, was a machine, a corporate behemoth driven by profit margins and predictable formulas. And the Echoes, with their dissonant harmonies and challenging lyrics, were anything but predictable. Across the imposing mahogany desk sat Mr. Alistair Finch, a senior EMI executive. Finch was a man carved from the old guard, impeccably dressed, with a stern gaze and a deep-seated suspicion of anything that deviated from the commercially viable. He saw the Echoes not as artists, but as a financial risk, a problem. The meeting had been arranged by John, a rare intervention for a band not his own. He had used his considerable influence, his Beatle power, to get the Echoes a hearing. He believed in them. He believed in their music. Finch, however, was clearly unimpressed. He had listened to their demo tape with a look of barely concealed disdain. His face, usually impassive, now held a hint of condescension. "Mr. Lennon," Finch began, his voice smooth but laced with a dismissive tone, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, truly. But frankly, this music is challenging. It lacks commercial appeal. It's disorganized. Frankly, it sounds like a cacophony. We simply cannot invest in something so unmarketable." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a thinly veiled insult to both the Echoes and, by extension, John's judgment. He then turned his gaze to Yoko, a subtle sneer playing on his lips. "Perhaps, Ms. Ono, you find some artistic merit in this noise, but our shareholders, I assure you, do not." The room went silent. The other executives present shifted uncomfortably. Finch had not just dismissed the band, he had humiliated them, and subtly, Yoko, in front of John. He had zombied them, draining them of their artistic lifeblood with his corporate cynicism. John Lennon, the man who had faced down presidents and pop critics, felt a cold fury rise within him. He looked at Alistair Finch, his eyes narrowing. What happened next would become a legendary, yet largely unrecorded moment. A clash of wills, a battle for artistic integrity against corporate greed. An executive had zombied a new band, and John Lennon was about to do something that would make the entire record label stop. John Lennon's passion for supporting new, unconventional artists was deeply ingrained in his rebellious spirit. He had always been an outsider, a provocateur, as someone who challenged the status quo. He saw the music industry's tendency to homogenize and commercialize as a threat to true artistic expression. By 1967, the Beatles were at the zenith of their creative powers, pushing boundaries with albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But even within their own success, John felt the constant pressure to conform, to deliver what was expected. He understood the struggle of artists trying to break through with something genuinely new. His relationship with Yoko Ono, which was blossoming at this time, further fueled his appreciation for avant-garde and experimental art. Yoko, a conceptual artist who had long operated outside the mainstream, taught him the value of artistic freedom, of creating for creation's sake, regardless of commercial viability. The Echoes, with their raw and unpolished sound, embodied this spirit. They weren't trying to be the next Beatles, they were trying to be themselves. Their music was a chaotic symphony of feedback, spoken word, and unconventional melodies, a direct challenge to the pop sensibilities that dominated the charts. John saw their potential, their honesty, and their courage. Alistair Finch, the EMI executive, represented everything John despised about the corporate music world. Finch saw music as a product, artists as commodities, and innovation as a risk to be avoided. He believed in formulas, in market research, in the safe bet. He was a gatekeeper, wielding his power to decide who got a chance and who remained in obscurity. His dismissal of the Echoes was not just a business decision, it was a cultural one. It was a rejection of anything that didn't fit his narrow definition of music. And his subtle insult to Yoko was a deliberate attempt to undermine John, to remind him of the controversial nature of his new relationship. The atmosphere in the EMI boardroom was now charged. The unspoken question hung heavy. Would John Lennon, the most famous musician in the world, simply accept Finch's dismissal? Or would he, the eternal rebel, rise to the defense of these young artists and the very principle of artistic freedom? John had used his name, his power, to get the Echoes this far. To let Finch zombie them, to crush their spirit with corporate cynicism, would be a betrayal of his own beliefs. He couldn't let it stand. He couldn't let that kind of artistic suppression go unchallenged, not in his presence, but not when he had a voice that could cut through the noise. The meeting had stopped, but a different kind of performance was about to begin. A performance of conviction, of courage, and of an unwavering belief in the power of uncompromised art. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon slowly pushed himself up from his armchair, his eyes never leaving Alistair Finch. The casual disdain on Finch's face began to waver, replaced by a flicker of unease. He had underestimated John's resolve. "Mr. Finch?" John's voice was low, almost a growl, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "You talk about commercial appeal. You talk about marketable. You talk about cacophony." He took a step closer to the desk, his presence filling the room. "Let me tell you something about cacophony. When we first started, half the world thought the Beatles were a cacophony. Too loud, too long hair, too much yeah, yeah, yeah." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The other executives in the room, suddenly remembering who they were dealing with, and shifted nervously. "You dismiss the Echoes because they don't fit your neat little boxes," John continued, his voice rising, "because they dare to make sounds you don't understand. Because they're not trying to be another manufactured pop act for your shareholders." He pointed a finger directly at Finch. "You're not just rejecting a band, Mr. Finch. You're rejecting the future. You're rejecting art. You're rejecting everything that's real and honest in music." Finch, flustered, tried to interject. "Now, Mr. Lennon, that's hardly fair. We have a business to run." A business of stifling talent, John retorted, his voice now a full-blown roar that echoed off the polished walls. A business of turning artists into puppets. You call their music noise. I call it passion. I call it truth. And I call your judgment narrow-minded, cowardly, as an utterly devoid of any understanding of what music truly is. He turned to the other executives, his gaze sweeping across their pale faces. Do you know what happens when you zombie a band like the Echoes? You kill the spark. You tell them their voice doesn't matter. You tell them to conform, to be bland, to be safe. And when you do that, you don't just lose a band. You lose the next revolution. You lose the next great idea. You lose the very soul of what we're supposed to be doing here. The room was utterly silent. Finch, red-faced and sputtering, was completely disarmed. The other executives looked down at their notes, avoiding eye contact. John Lennon, the rock and roll icon, had just delivered a blistering sermon on artistic integrity, and the corporate machine had no answer. He then turned back to Finch, and his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you can dismiss Yoko's artistic merit? You think you can talk down to her, to us, to any artist who dares to be different? Let me be clear, Mr. Finch. If the Echoes don't get a fair shot, if they don't get the support they deserve, then you can consider my future with EMI very, very different. The threat hung in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. John Lennon, the biggest star on their roster, was essentially threatening to walk, or at the very least, make their lives a living hell. The financial implications alone were staggering. The entire record label, represented by the stunned executives in that room, had just stopped, frozen by the raw power of one man's conviction. John's outburst had shattered the carefully constructed facade of corporate decorum. The meeting, intended to be a swift dismissal, had become a battleground. Alistair Finch, though outwardly composed, was reeling. He had never encountered such direct, unbridled defiance from an artist, especially one of John Lennon's stature. He was used to artists being grateful, compliant, or at least manageable. John's threat, however subtle, was a direct challenge to his authority and, more importantly, to EMI's bottom line. The other executives witnessing the confrontation understood the gravity of the situation. John Lennon was not just a musician, he was a brand, a cultural phenomenon. Losing his goodwill, or worse, his association with EMI, would be a catastrophic blow. The financial repercussions would be immense, affecting not just record sales, but also the label's prestige and influence. The Echoes, who had been sitting silently, on their faces a mixture of despair and quiet resignation, now watched in stunned disbelief. They had expected a polite rejection, perhaps a few platitudes. They had never imagined that John Lennon would unleash such a torrent of passion on their behalf. It was a moment of profound validation, a sudden injection of hope into their dying artistic dreams. Yoko Ono, ever the calm observer, offered John a small, almost imperceptible smile. She understood the depth of his anger, the righteous fury that fueled his defense. She knew that for John, this wasn't just about a band, it was about a principle. It was about fighting for the freedom to create, a battle she had waged her entire life. The meeting devolved into a tense, whispered discussion among the executives. Finch, clearly outmaneuvered, was forced to reconsider, and the risk of alienating John Lennon far outweighed the perceived risk of investing in an unmarketable band. The corporate machine, for a brief, shining moment, had been forced to bend to the will of an artist. John, still standing, his gaze unwavering, watched them. He knew the game. He knew that corporate decisions were rarely made out of artistic appreciation, but out of fear of financial loss. He had played his hand, and he had played it well. The silence in the room was no longer one of dismissal, but of strategic recalculation. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically. The zombied band, once written off, was now a pawn in a much larger game, a game John Lennon was determined to win. The unraveling of the machine had begun, and in its wake, a new, fragile possibility for the Echoes was starting to emerge. The whispered discussions among the EMI executives finally ceased. Alistair Finch, his face still flushed, cleared his throat. "Mr. Lennon," he began, his voice now devoid of its earlier condescension, "we understand your passion, and we certainly value your contributions to EMI. Perhaps we were too hasty in our assessment." He avoided John's gaze, looking instead at the ceiling. "We are prepared to offer the Echoes a development deal. A smaller advance, perhaps, but with a commitment to studio time and a dedicated A&R representative to guide their unique sound." It was a concession, a retreat, not a full embrace of their artistic vision, but a lifeline, a chance. John, his expression unreadable, simply nodded. He knew this was the best he could get in this environment. He had forced the machine to acknowledge the band, and to give them a foot in the door. He turned to the Echoes, who were now openly staring, a mixture of shock and burgeoning hope on their faces. "You heard the man," John said, a faint smile finally touching his lips. "You got your shot. Don't waste it." The band members, still stunned, could only nod, their eyes wide with gratitude. Finch, eager to salvage some semblance of control, quickly added, "Of course, Mr. Lennon, we would expect you to be involved, perhaps as a producer or a mentor." John considered this for a moment. He knew his continued presence would be crucial to ensure EMI didn't renege on their promise. "I'll keep an eye on them," he said, his voice firm, "and I'll expect regular updates on their progress. Understand?" Finch nodded vigorously. "Perfectly, Mr. Lennon, perfectly." The meeting, which had begun with such hostility, ended with a grudging yet undeniable victory for artistic integrity. John Lennon, the rock and roll icon, had just used his immense power not for personal gain, but to champion a struggling, unconventional band. He had stared down the corporate machine, and for a brief, shining moment, he had made it bend. The entire record label, which had stopped in its tracks, was now forced to move in a direction it had initially resisted. The zombied band had been brought back to life, given a chance to breathe, to create, to echo their unique sound into the world. It was a testament to the power of conviction, the courage to speak truth to power, and the profound impact one man could have when he chose to fight for what he believed in. The aftermath of that tumultuous meeting at EMI reverberated through the London music scene. The Echoes, against all odds, secured their development deal. John Lennon, true to his word, became their unofficial mentor, offering advice, lending his studio, and occasionally even sitting in on their sessions. His presence alone was a shield, ensuring that EMI executives, though still wary, treated the band with a newfound respect. The band, invigorated by John's belief in them, poured their hearts into their music. They refined their sound, without compromising their experimental edge. They released a critically acclaimed EP, followed by a full-length album that, while not a commercial blockbuster, garnered a dedicated cult following and influenced a generation of underground artists. Alistair Finch, the EMI executive, yet found his career subtly altered. While he remained in his position, the incident with John Lennon became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale within the corporate corridors. He became more cautious, less overtly dismissive of unconventional talent, always aware that the Lennon factor could reappear at any moment. For John, this act of advocacy was a profound affirmation of his own artistic values. It was a reminder that his fame, his power, could be wielded for good, to protect and promote the kind of music he believed in. It deepened his commitment to artistic freedom and his disdain for corporate control. The incident also subtly strengthened his bond with Yoko. She had witnessed his fierce loyalty, his willingness to fight for their shared ideals. It was a testament to their partnership, not just as lovers, but as fellow artists and activists. The grey walls of EMI Records, though still standing, had been momentarily shaken. The corporate machine, though vast and powerful, had been forced to acknowledge that sometimes the most valuable asset wasn't a predictable hit, but an unpredictable genius. The Echoes, the band that had been zombied by an executive, had been given a chance. And in their unique, challenging music, the echoes of John Lennon's defiant roar could always be heard. It was a story of a small victory, a testament to the fact that even in the most rigid systems, the human spirit, when championed by a powerful voice, can find a way to break through. New York City, December 8, 1980. John Lennon was murdered. His voice silenced, but his legacy and the story of his unwavering commitment to artistic freedom continued to resonate. The incident at EMI in 1967, though a quiet moment in the grand narrative of his life, became a powerful testament to his character. It revealed a man who, despite his own flaws and struggles, possessed an unshakable belief in the power of uncompromised art and a profound courage in the face of corporate cynicism. Yoko Ono, in the decades that followed, became the fierce guardian of John's legacy, ensuring his music and his message continued to reach the world. She continued her own artistic journey, her work finally receiving the critical recognition it deserved, a testament to her own resilience and vision. The Echoes, though they never achieved mainstream superstardom, left an indelible mark on the underground music scene. Their music, championed by John Lennon, became a touchstone for artists who dared to be different, a reminder that commercial success was not the only measure of artistic worth. The story of the executive who zombied a new band and John Lennon's powerful response is not found in every official biography. It's a hidden truth, a whisper in the annals of rock and roll history. But for those who know it, it speaks volumes about the man John Lennon truly was. Not just a rock star, not just an activist, but a deeply courageous, profoundly committed human being who would not tolerate the suppression of genuine artistic expression. He didn't just stop the meeting. He transformed the entire record label's approach, if only for a moment. He didn't just defy an executive. He reaffirmed his message of artistic freedom and integrity in the most powerful way possible. And in doing so, he left an unseen ripple of change that slowly, subtly, began to shift perceptions, proving that sometimes the most powerful statements are delivered not with anger, but with unwavering conviction and profound love for the creative spirit. The grey walls of EMI Records still stand. The echoes of that meeting have faded into history. But the echo of John Lennon's defiance, his quiet courage, and his profound commitment to art still resonates. A timeless reminder that true strength lies not in conforming, but in challenging and letting the symphony of defiance play on. The official records of EMI might only show a revised contract for The Echoes, a footnote in history. But the true story isn't in the reports. It's in the memory of a split second, a silenced executive, a defiant roar, and the profound respect that followed. The end. And if this story about courage, artistic integrity, and the power of standing up for what you believe in moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that true strength lies in upholding dignity and creativity for all. What moment taught you the most about the power of confronting corporate cynicism? Tell us in the comments below.